That's what we're talking about today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Miss Megan. One of the things I get asked about the most is what brushes I use and why. So I'm gonna break down in this video a little bit about kind of my go-to brushes, why I picked them, and how you can kind of identify what a brush does with having very limited information. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a post. And if you wanna learn a little bit more about my favorite brushes, please keep on watching. This is my go-to foundation brush. I feel like I've already done this video. Okay, these are two different styles of brushes that I use that serve two entirely different purposes. Or the brush style itself almost tells you what it's gonna do. So something like this is densely packed and dome shaped. This is gonna give you coverage. It's gonna be, your coverage is gonna be dense like the brush is. This here is open and wispy, so that's gonna give you less coverage. So when you have your foundation, this type of brush, you use this type of motion to build coverage. And another thing too is, this one's quite large, but if you had like the 170, you would want to make sure that the product is evenly loaded before you go into something. Yes, you can use these, like I have tanner on my arms, I shouldn't have put it there. If you do this, it's going to be a lot more sheer than when you build your coverage. When you have brushes like this, you have to load them entirely. And then when you go in and you use this sort of like whisking motion, that gives you a really sheer, soft coverage. So that can also depend on the formula you're working with. So a fuller coverage formula can use both of the brushes and either build the coverage of it or sheer it out. If you have a really thin formula, like these don't always work. You'll opt for something more like this. You can really push into the skin. When it comes to blush, I tend to opt for one of these two options. So again, something densely packed, meaning I'm gonna be pushing the product, the blush, in onto the skin, versus something big and loose and wispy like this is gonna give me more of that soft, like veil. So something that's a cream product, it needs to be picked up with more density. So that's where you're gonna go with a more dense brush. And not enough people, some people just touch makeup like this. Work the product in. Stop whispering makeup on. Evenly loaded. And then you're using a pressing motion. Use swiping too, but this will just have more control and build up your pigment in the area that you want it to. This is an old blush I used to really love called Sir. And this, I find the brush needs to be a little bit dirtier. And this, I'll put this on myself, is when you're just whispering another tone back onto the skin. So it's not that I want the texture there. It's not that I want a super big focus on the product. It's just that I need to tint the color a little bit. So I could pick something different and, you know, whisper this on top to deepen it compared to what it looked like here. You have to know what you're comfortable with and what you're applying. If your technique is like this, you might not actually like this, and you might opt for something that's more like an angled brush to push it through. But again, that's why the options are really endless, and you really have to know what your technique is like. This is just my version of kind of why I pick the brushes that I pick. Kind of a similar concept to the foundation. This is for cream bronzer or cream contour. If I'm doing bronzer, because we're covering a wider section of product, the brush needs to be wider to hit those areas. So I'll use this with where my cream bronzer is, but when it comes to cream contour, which is more of this like gray shade, I need that precision that the edge gives. So your brush either needs to be small or really straight to be able to hug the area that you're working in, because your bronzer is more widespread and your contour is more small. So just in those words, the brush, one brush needs to be a little bit bigger, one brush needs to be a little bit smaller. And where you hold your brush also affects the coverage too. This is always gonna be light and no control. This is gonna be stronger with a lot of control. When it comes to powder bronzer, I have a lot of different options for different reasons. This is if I need to, because same concept. You can see that this is more densely packed and shorter than this one. So this has a lot more flexibility to it compared to this one. This one's a little bit stiffer. This is when I need to pack precision bronzer, meaning I don't want it to go all over the place. I need it to stay in a certain area because of the size that it has. This I use if I'm like underpainting with True Harmony. 187, this is my big guy. This is when I'm doing more of this circular motion, and I use this with C8 because this is gonna cover a larger area faster because the brush is larger. Like your brush really does kind of tell you what it can do based on its size. Also, your brush choice is based on the size of your face as well. This could be too big for somebody with a smaller face than me. And then this I use with Global Glow. So this I use for bronzers, bronzer toppers, kind of like bronzy highlights, because I just want a dusting. So this is an equivalent to something like this, just in a different product. If I was to go in with Global Glow with these, it's gonna go on too heavy. So this allows me to softly whisper it on because this itself is softer and more flexible. I like more airbrush looking skin, so I'm always gonna opt for things that are a little bit bigger and softer. The softer something is, the more likely it is to have an airbrushed look to it. So these are my go-to concealers. Obviously they're two entirely different sizes. The smaller something is, the more precise it can be and the more coverage it's gonna build. This is a little bit wider, so it's gonna shear out the formula a little bit faster, because that one dot of product that this brush handles keeps it in one area where this spreads it out. It's all just personal preference. This straighter edge cleans up really well in this area. This can do it too. It's all personal preference, but I prefer this to control my coverage because again, it's the technique that I like to use where I work pretty quick, so I need a brush to be softer so that I can move things around a lot faster. Other people, I'll use stuff like this because my technique on concealer on other people is still the same, but just depending on face size or formula, you could go for something like this. Another brush I can't live without specifically is the 109. So this is my favorite for studio tech and buffing product into the skin. So it's a flat top, so it's gonna allow me to build the coverage because it's quite dense too. There just is this flexibility to it, meaning that I can work faster with it. This is the OG version. This is a natural hair one, because that's their heights now. This one I use for translucent powder, and this is because I use a pressing motion to work it into the skin, not a big fluffy one. If you loose powder is fluffy and loose, so if you match that energy with the brush, it's just gonna go everywhere. I want target control, meaning that it has to be a little bit smaller. This I also use for concealer and targeted powder. So when I'm building coverage, I need something that's even smaller, even more dense to maximize on the coverage of the product. So this is where I press on C2 Studio Fix powder for optimal coverage under the eye from that product. If I used it with loose powder, it would be fine. But so if you're like, I don't like powder, but I just need to blur out pores, then you're just targeting this area with a small brush. This is also good too if you want to be targeted about your contour. It's also really good for like a wash of color on the eye. So it serves a lot of different purposes, but that's what I use this one for. The brushes you see me use the most, and they are my favorite. 224 is the absolute go because again, big and fluffy. I like my eyes very blown out and hazy, so I don't want anything that's overly small when I'm going in to blend it out. So this is where I do a lot of my work, the lid color and the crease color. If I need more detail work in here but still want softness, I go for the 221 because I'll pick up such a small amount of product and just kind of trace it through that area so it's blending as it's applying. I'll also use these under the eye, but if I need more target precision or I'm like building up a little bit of depth in the outer corner, the 219 really is that girl, especially under here, pressing in this area. But again, it's more detail work for me than anything else. And then this is one of my favorites. This is a 218. This was limited edition, but basically something that's just small and tapered. So it's like an extremely small version of these guys. This is what I did for this wing, or to like haze out and smoke out my liner. I can use this too, and I also go back in and add these, but really for like a Miss Megan hazy, like loose, open, smoky eye, these, but ultimately it's these. So those are the brushes that I reach for on a regular basis to achieve a look like this. Ultimately, the ones that I would travel with as well. Sometimes I'll just double up on just these specific ones, but I know that this will give me my full face without question. Like I'm looking, like I have, these are all dirty right now. These are all dirty. I have clean ones too. So many different options and different ways that you can achieve makeup looks. Like I also really love something like this. This is the 26 brush from Melt. It's so tiny, so if I really need to just blend out liner without making it super smudgy, I love something like this. I also really love Melt brushes. They are Melt and BK Beauty are like top 3 brushes for me. I don't really care about any other ones. My favorite eyeliner brush is the 209 because it's a little bit more firm but still has flexibility to it. So I have a really good amount of control if I'm doing a graphic liner, but I opt for brush black to do my graphic liner because it's the easier option. I hope this gives you just a little bit more background on why I select the brushes that I select and kind of how to work with them. I have, I think, 2 other brush videos, or I have a brush video on here and then brushes on TikTok as well. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a post. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram, all under the same name, at Miss Megan Robinson. Let me know if there's a brush that you don't know how to work with or what your favorite brushes are. 224, that eyeshadow fluffy eyeshadow brush, that is one of my longest running brushes. It's the first makeup brush my first real makeup brush that I ever bought. And until then, I'll see you next time. Bye.